Hello, my name is Andy, but most people call me Papa Bear. My clients call me the Afterlife Coach. It's my mission to accompany them and you in joy and sorrow so that you may become your ever more authentic self. Welcome to Life After Life, my YouTube channel. Here I bear witness to the powerful stories of LGBTQ people and their allies, and together we celebrate their ability to start over again after trauma and pain. For this inaugural podcast, I'm joined by Matt. He has agreed to share his story, and I'm sure that it will resonate with many of you. Matt, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
All right, let's jump right into the heart of the matter. Where does your
Yep.
story begin?
So my story begins, I was 13 years old, very unknowing of myself and my life. And in August, I was handed a plane ticket to Utah and pretty much told to board a plane, get on, and wait for someone to come pick me up at the luggage claim area. And after that, I was sent I stayed for 3 years at a conversion therapy camp from 13 to 16.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's what was running through your head at the time you left for the camp and then when you first arrived there?
My first thought when I was heading there was it was a lot of confusion. I didn't know why. At the time when I was 13, I was just coming kind of into terms with being gay. I told a few of my classmates and I told my football coach that I thought I might be gay. And I had a little conversation with my parents asking, like, what would they think if I was gay? And I think that kind of filtered down through my family to my grandparents, who are very religious folk and just kind of wanted the best. So there's a lot of confusion on the plane ride over, a lot of nerves, a lot of insecurity that was building up in me because I didn't know what did wrong to deserve it, to just be kind of sent away. But it wasn't that I was going away because I was gay. And being picked up, I was traumatized because there were two other kids there that were also part of it that had no idea. One of them did, I think, looking back at it, I think he knew why he was there. But we pretty much were waiting at the baggage claim, and this guy came up and asked for our names and asked for our, school ID, and we gave it to him, and he just said, "Get in the van, and we're going for a drive." And 2.5 hours later, we were in the middle of nowhere in the woods, pretty much, of Utah, like woods as they call them. And we get out, and I met by the director or leader, Reverend John, and he pretty much told me that I'm here because I'm gay, and his mission is to, as he called it, deconstruct the gay and reconstruct alpha male mentality and personality in me. And I pretty much got all my stuff taken away except the clothes I had on me. And he said, this guy's going to show you to your cabin and we're going to begin. And my first thought was pure panic, because hearing that they wanted to like deconstruct the gay, I guess at the time, didn't really resonate with me. I heard the word gay, and so that panic of crap, I'm here because I'm gay kicked in. And my shyness and my insecurity really came to the forefront. But the minute I walked into my cabin with 7 other guys, I was very directly told that, like, you're here because you're gay. He's not here to make you straight. He's here to put the genetic mentality of being an alpha male inside of you. And I pretty much just got like punched right in the face and was beaten up to see how I would survive and how I would react. And that was literally my first day. And I arrived at like 9 o'clock at night. So I was tired, exhausted emotionally and mentally. And I just got beat up by 3 guys to see if I could survive the first night. And I went to my bunk and cried for about 4 days after that. So
Physically beaten, I take it.
physically being, yeah, it was pretty much kind of like pinned against the wall and beaten up.
So, first of all, I'm sorry. I can imagine what that experience was like.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, at the time that you went to the camp, how out were you to yourself, to others?
I was, to myself, I think I knew I was. More specifically, I remember because at the time I was 13. The big movie was 13 Going on 30 with Jennifer Gardner. And there was that infamous scene where that guy is stripping for her. And I just remember being so attracted to it and kind of being like, oh crap, like I think I'm gay. And with some of my friends, I think they already kind of knew. And kind of like later in life down the road, after talking to my parents about, just me as a kid, my mom and my dad said they always knew that there was something different about me. So I was coming to terms with it, and I was just trying to navigate it at the time because, I lived in downstate Michigan, suburb of Detroit, and it really wasn't like a big deal, I thought. So I wasn't really too worried about it, truthfully.
I might choose to make a distinction between recognizing that you have feelings
Hmm.
for other men on one hand
Yeah.
and being ready to cope with hostility and homophobia in the world on the
Hmm.
other.
Right.
Yeah. And it sounds to me like maybe you might have started the one, but
Hmm.
really hadn't begun the process of the other. How does that
No,
land with you?
it lands because I can kind of. So for me, growing up, my sexuality was never. For those 3 years, yeah, my sexuality was a big thing from 13 to 16, obviously. But afterwards, I just like my high school and my college was never. My sexuality never meant anything really. I became pretty open in high school, kind of just being myself. And if, I was gay, then that was kind of there for that. So I went through high school pretty unscathed and everything. I went to college. I went to a very small school in Michigan. But like at the time, it was like 1,000 kids, so everyone knew everyone. Um, and I was already kind of like that weird, vibrant kid, so everyone already knew I was gay. I rushed a fraternity openly gay, and that was never an issue. So it never became like a recognition of homophobia or like discrimination against me, probably until I was in Seattle and I faced discrimination within the gay community itself.
Okay. Okay.
So it probably wasn't until I was 23, 24 that I realized that, there is a world out there that isn't too welcoming and supportive of gay people.
And that you perhaps had the defenses
Yes,
to deal with that. Yeah. Okay.
definitely.
Take us back to the camp, if you might.
Hmm.
What happened then in the next 3 years?
So it was pretty much kind of run like a boarding school fight club, the intro to 300 with the boys who had to like raise themselves up by doing things they probably wouldn't have done, and school education, and a lot of labor. So, waking up, we woke up at 5 a.m. every day, and we pretty much had to fight for our food rations in the line up for food. There was about 30 of us at the time. And, we had to fight in a circle to see who could come out and who could fight the longest. And whoever could fight the longest was the first one in line to get the most food. And then it trickled down from there. And then we had schooling from about 7 to about noon. And then it was a lot of manual labor of, cleaning up the place, getting firewood, getting water for everything that needed to be done. And then it was more kind of talk and judgment on not having the alpha male mentality in our heads that we thought we didn't have. And then they did something called social exercising, which was pretty much where they wanted us to be in situations where we would encounter having homosexual feelings toward other men. And they would go around and kind of test to see where we were on the subject. So a lot of it was like hand holding, like hugging, like really close intimate contact with other guys. And they would come around and they would check our heart rate, our pulse, and kind of see how we were doing. And if it was a spiked elevated one, we were taken out. We were beaten up by some of the older counselors that were part of the camp. And hopefully that would like, be like, that's a bad thing to have and that's a bad thing to react to. And then we had dinner at 8. And then from 8 to 9 was when we had like one-on-one sessions with the counselors and Reverend John. And it was pretty much just like a scolding session of, he had like binders, like our parents and whoever sent us had binders full of our life story. And he pretty much like went through it and was saying like, this is where you exhibited this and that's bad. This is where you exhibited this and it was bad. Obviously leaning towards or suggesting, early signs of a kid being gay, like artistic, flamboyant, didn't play sports, only had female friends, only connected with female friends, and all that. And every time that there was an issue, it was a punch to the face or it was a punch to the gut. And then we were pretty much by ourselves from 11 to 5 a.m. the next morning.
Did anybody's heart rate actually go down after a beating?
I
It
don't,
seems to
I
me that
don't,
that might turn it into an even more traumatic. the
You
check-in like that would be even more traumatic,
right.
more likely to elevate your heart rate.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of like a panic situation where you knew you had to force yourself to bring it down.
Okay.
And I think it was a lot of fear tactics was truly what he was going for was, if he could put the fear in you, then you would have this natural inkling to suppress. And it was different because he wasn't necessarily trying to turn us straight. He was just trying to put in this gene mentality that he thought all gay people have, which was the alpha mentality that he thinks only straight men have or successful men have or husbands have.
By exposing you to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I know that you told me offline you felt pressure to participate in some of the darker parts of life in the
Mm-hmm.
camp.
Yeah.
What do you want to say about that?
I like I said offline, I really do hold the motto that I have blood on my hands very strongly. Because growing up after I got out and after I was in Seattle and after I've like lived my life as long as I have, I'm a very passive person. I'll fight if I have to, but it's not naturally in me to just beat up anybody. So to be at that camp, and I was assigned a 3-year program. It was a 3 or 6 year program, and I was assigned 3 years. And in my head, I was like, 3 years, not that long. I can do it. I just have to do what I have to survive. So I did kind of embrace that need to have the alpha male mentality because I wanted to survive. I wasn't My number one thought in my head the entire time was like, this is the last place I'm going to die. I'm not going to die in the middle of godforsaken nowhere in the Bible Belt at this camp at the hands of this man or at the hands of anybody else. Like, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die in my own hands. And there's a lot of regret I feel still towards what I did. Sporadically throughout my years, I've actually ran into former participants that were at the camp with me. Some of them were a lot younger, so there was a lot more guilt because there was one guy I remember very distinctly. I was on a flight to Seattle and there was an issue with some seating behind me, and the flight attendant asked to see everyone's tickets. And one of the names that was mentioned was a guy who came into my cabin probably within the last 3 months of my time there, and it was his first night there. And I distinctly remember having to beat him up. And you know, it we my cabin definitely had to put in a way the stronger will to survive. So we really went in on this because we wanted to make an impression and we wanted to get out as soon as we could. So I'm pretty convinced we beat this guy to, the last breath of his life. And having him one row behind me randomly going to Seattle was one of the hardest things I ever had to come to. And I actually got to talk to him. And he's been in the mentality where he was in his life to just block that whole thing out, where you could tell he remembered, but he didn't want to open up that floodgate and he didn't want to open up that memory again. So he definitely pushed it under, and it was very passe in his responses to me. But, to see where he was now, it definitely made me happy. But, to have to sit there and be part of a group beat up session is not me. To have to be mean for no reason isn't me at
Right.
all. But it was
Right.
what I was trained to do in 3 years.
What impact do you think? I'm using the word trauma quite
Mm-hmm.
consciously, because I think what you're describing is both physical trauma, but also emotional trauma, psychological.
Mm-hmm.
Um, would you agree with that?
Yeah. Physically, I came out. I felt in a way alpha just because, I was eating more protein because alpha males eat protein and they're supposed to worry about being like big and bulky. So I was definitely bigger. I was stronger in a way because all we did was manual labor 95% of the time.
Mhm.
Mentally and emotionally, though, I was definitely just like a scared little 5-year-old who was doing whatever I had to do to survive. And coming out of it, I became very reserved. I remember my first year back at a regular high school, I was very quiet. But I was super judgy. Like any person who just had something different than my own thoughts, I was very quick to judge, and I just did not accept, and I pushed very hard away. So I was a loner for about 2 years in high school.
So you've already mentioned getting out of the camp and going back to,
Mm-hmm.
dare I call it, normal life.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come to leave the camp, and how did you begin to process what happened to you while you were there?
So when you get to the camp, based on your folder, you have Reverend John and two of the head counselors, which most of his counselors were people who were his first 10 participants, when she called the accolades. And that's how we knew how to describe them, were the accolades. And that's who you wanted to be. I mean, these men were like big, big men. And, they had families and they had kids and they had a life and they had all that. Um, they were the ones who decided how long you were there. So you could be there for a year, you could be there for 3 years, or you could be there for 6 years. I was there for 3 years based off my binder that I had, pretty much saying that, I was a sports kid. I liked lacrosse. I liked swimming. I could talk football at the time. I didn't have very effeminate attributes and everything. So I was only in there for 3 years. So at the end of my 3 years, I was literally kind of just let go. And I was woken up one morning and Reverend John came in and he said, "Congratulations. Here's your plane ticket back home. Get out of here." And they took me to the airport and I hopped on. I landed back in Detroit. And I was met by my parents, and it wasn't very much like a celebratory welcome. It was just kind of like a hello kind of thing. And transitioning back was probably the hardest thing I had because, obviously being a gay male at the age of 13 to 16, when you're around other males, in my head, all I was kind of doing was like picking out my ideal guy that I wanted to have in my life, if I ever thought about that, but I knew I had to like keep it down low. So I was definitely more scared to express who I was. So I was definitely processing of who I was and what made me who I was. So I definitely jumped around different cliques. I tried like the emo group, I tried like the preppy kids, I tried the athletes, I tried everything trying to find my sense of belonging because I didn't know what I was because there was no other alpha male mentality men around me at the time. So I was definitely very much lost and confused on who and where I belonged in this world.
What happened next?
After that, I mean, my big awakening to realizing that I definitely A, did not have the alpha gene mentality in me, and that B, that like I was wholeheartedly gay and I couldn't deny it, was when this new kid came into the class, a new transfer student, and obviously gay, obviously very flamboyant, very feminine, very comfortable with his whole personality. And I just remember sitting there like looking at him and being like, that's hot. And it wasn't that I was like physically attracted to him. It was just like I was so turned on by his confidence to be gay. And that's when I just knew like it didn't work. I don't have the gene. I can't make up the gene. I can't pretend to have it. And after that, I just kind of fully started to work on accepting the fact that I was gay and that like I was going to have boyfriends. I was going to hopefully have like a husband down the road, and that, my life was going to be gay centric in a way. And I really kind of started to push out and become that creative kid that I always was, and kind of just not giving a damn because I saw other kids that were gay that, it wasn't a problem for them. So I was like, well, if these kids can make it, so can I. So that's what I really strive to do throughout my rest of my high school and college years.
And what if I were to ask you to connect the dots then between making that realization and yet still
Mm.
having had the experience of being in the camp? How did you connect or disconnect those two things?
I had to disconnect. The biggest disconnect for me was one of the big takeaways we had from the camp that Reverend John really instilled on us was, if you can't make the alpha gene mentality work for you, it's better to kill yourself than to be gay. So my big first realization that there was just a huge disconnect in what I was taught for 3 years and who I was trying to be was when I got my first phone call saying that one of the guys in my cabin committed suicide. And from there, it was just a huge spiraling effect. Out of the 7 guys that were in my cabin, I'm the only one that's still alive right now.
Wow.
Because all the rest of the 7 who were there for 6 years, and they were there from a younger age than I was, they couldn't make it, and they thought that there was something wrong with them, so they took their own life because of what they were taught. And that's when the disconnect really happened. Was like, I realized I did have a supporting family. I had a good support group. I was doing decently well in school. I was getting ready to apply for colleges, and I I just like was able to like look back on everything I did as a kid and realize that like I have I have a life, and me being gay is not going to force me to commit suicide.
Well, my friend, I'm certainly glad that you're here with us today.
Thank you.
Um, what a horrific track record
Mm-hmm.
that is. What is it about you, do you think, that allowed you to not succumb the way the other men in your cabin did?
It was a that as I started to become gay, I just realized how happy I was, and it was definitely that I was kind of looking for guys who matched the energy that I wanted in my life. That I knew like this is where I felt good, this is where I felt safe, and I just continuously wanted to feel like that. And then B, there was just this like weird underlying love going on between me and my parents where we didn't really want to talk about what happened, but they knew that they messed up. I knew that I didn't belong there, and that there was forgiveness that needed to happen along the way, but it wasn't my time to leave. And I was also kind of in my head, especially when I really started hearing about all my friends who started committing suicide, that suicide was a very selfish thing to do.
Mm.
And, I couldn't imagine leaving my family, like doing that to them. So that's where it really hit home that like, you know, I was adopted at a young age, and my parents really instilled that like, I was picked for a reason to be part of their family, and I was brought into their family for a reason. And so it just really hit home that like I couldn't do that to my family, especially my sisters. So
Now tell me, you mentioned family
mm-hmm,
and resolving matters with them. I think many men would have gone through a similar situation and been very bitter and very angry
mm-hmm,
towards their families. They were, after all, the people that sent you.
right.
How do you think you reached the point where you are with family?
With so it's definitely broken up, individually based. With my sisters, you know, it doesn't really involve them that much. There's a 6 year age gap between me and my middle sister. So when I was going to this camp, she was already starting her life in college as a freshman. So, she had her own life going on. She knew I just went away. My older sister's mentally and physically disabled, kind of first grade, second grade education. Still doesn't really understand what's going on in a lot of things. With my mom, knowing my mom as I do, I can't wholeheartedly say that she knew that what she was doing was this bad. She thought she was doing what was right. So there's definitely an easier sense to forgive my mom. With my dad, it's just a classic father son relationship. Me and my dad are polar opposites. We've always been, we're always going to be. It was his family that decided to send me originally. So there's a little bit of animosity between them. So me and my dad's relationship is still kind of struggling, but there's, maybe like twice a month I'll get a text from my dad or a phone call from my dad where, he'll see something in the news about gay rights or, teen suicide because of being gay, and my dad just apologizes every single time for it to this day. My grandparents, they're old, they're stubborn Italians. I'm not going to change them.
Okay.
So it's definitely kind of like a facaded, like their family. So I'm trying to love them as best as I can, but it's just one of those Italian things where it's like, we know what happened, but we don't want to talk about it
We don't
because of
talk.
everything that happened.
Okay. Can I ask, what does it feel like to get that text from your father that says, "I'm sorry"?
So up until just recently, it kind of was like, just, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, I love you. Like, don't worry about it. But, after meeting you and Kaylin and everyone at the camp, it was definitely a conversation of realizing that my parents never knew how bad and what went on at the camps. And so as soon as that, like about a few days after the retreat, I really did have this really hard conversation with them that probably lasted about 6 hours of,
Okay.
here's what went on at the camps. And, my dad's a very proud man. He rarely cries. But to see my dad sitting across from me crying about what went on and my mom crying, the texts now are, I feel like, a lot more sincere,
Mm.
and I can give a lot more sincerity back because it's obviously going back to that memory of everything I went through, especially being 13 and 16 when you're still growing up and still trying to figure out life, let alone future life plans.
Yeah, and here I'll just pause for our audience to say that Matt and I met one another at a men's retreat that was organized by Galen Strauss, who is my life coach, my ecstatic life coach, and Galen has a channel and on here on YouTube, but also a very extensive social media presence. And it was at that retreat that Matt and I first spoke, and I heard a little bit about Matt's story and became intrigued. So the there's a level of resolution then with your parents that's new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's awkward because, obviously there's like accepting your child as being gay, which, you always hear about where it's just this ongoing building. But then there's this other side, I think, that's, when you try to suppress your gay child or you try to deny your gay child and then seeing them grow up or going years without talking to them and seeing them do well and then try to rebuild that relationship, forgiveness, which is definitely where we're at, where me and my dad are specifically.
Okay. And just in light of what you just said, what would you say to parents who are thinking about conversion therapy for their LGBTQ child?
I mean, obviously, the first thing I would say was don't do it. I know that people think that it means well, and especially this day and age, they're figuring out new ways to hide their original plan. Um, looking back when I started kind of realizing what happened to me, I didn't know that it was conversion therapy. I was, because it wasn't, we're here to make you straight. We're here to make you have a wife, and we're here to like make you a proper person of society. And it wasn't definitely like the movie I'm a cheerleader kind of thing. Um, it was this manipulative way of saying that gay men don't have the alpha gene, but then looking back, you realize that the alpha gene was at the time considered a straight thing because gays are very submissive and very passive and very feminine, which females don't have the alpha gene. So it was this really good wording. And I think what parents need to be cautious of is really what they're doing there. And the wording that's being used is very important because you don't know until you do it. And it's traumatizing. I mean, I don't care who you are. I don't care what you say. I've never seen conversion therapy work. I have friends who went to very religious conversion therapies, and they're the first ones up on Grindr every single night. So it just doesn't work, and it's scary. And a lot of these conversion therapies and camps really do instill that if you can't be straight, get off the earth.
What a horrendous message to give to a child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you were to give some advice to a younger LGBTQ person who is about to face what you went through, what would you say?
I mean, obviously, I can use the tagline, it gets better. And, the tagline that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But I mean, really, it's literally like a 1 foot in front of the other situation. You have to take it literally one day at a time because, for me in my camp, it was no holds bar on when another camper could think that someone was lacking the alpha male gene or not having the alpha male mentality. So, there were nights that kids got beat up in their sleep because they were sleeping too weird or they just weren't doing things right. So it happened anywhere. But the biggest thing is definitely, just like 1 foot in front of the other, one day at a time, and really focus on you. And even though it's a dark spot right now, it's gonna help you figure out who you are at the end of the day.
What a wonderful segue. Matt, who are you today?
I mean, I'd like to say I'm getting better to be who I am. Still trying to figure it out. I think because, obviously there are days that I feel more feminine energy. Some days I feel more masculine energy, which, and especially going to that retreat and after obviously listening to your podcast and Caitlin's podcast, I've definitely started to understand that there's like a good weaving of both energies that any person can have. But I'm kind of just going through the motions of like what I really think is right. And for me, it's spontaneous. It's crazy. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people. It's a mishigash of creative babble and kind of just happiness.
There's something, a conversation that you and I had. Um, I was telling you a little bit about my story, and
Hmm.
I had a couple of really dramatic things happen in my life. And
Right.
I managed to get to a point, I think, where I was able to take a big step backwards, look at what happened, and to realize that it, in my case at least, was very much a springboard for personal development and growth.
Hmm.
Um, as you hear me say that, what's your reaction?
Looking, so what I personally take away from it is like looking back now, I realize that my protective nature that I have toward my family and friends wouldn't be as hard as it is if I didn't go through that camp. And me really caring about just a slight injustice to the world wouldn't be as hard as they were if I didn't go through that camp. So it's an ebb and flow kind of thing. Like there are days that I hate that I went to that camp, but then there are days that I look back and I'm like, if I can survive these 3 years, there's nothing in the world that can stop me. Um, so it's definitely made me a stronger person for others, and it's made me a stronger person to just learn that 3 years, as bad as they were, doesn't define the rest of my life.
Right. As you said earlier, you're still in the process of making that definition, of deciding
Yeah,
who you want to be.
right.
Um, as we think about closing down our conversation, what's the one thing you want our audience to take away from the discussion that you and I have had today?
I think the biggest thing is, and it's something that I've always kind of struggled with because, I grew up slightly as a judgy person, is you don't really know anyone's story. And, even though someone looks like they have this really stable, good life, you don't know the backstories to a lot of people. And there's friends that I've had for 20, 25 years now that, don't know that I went through this.
Okay.
It was definitely kind of like, the first year, oh, where's Matt? Oh, he's away, he's at a camp, he's doing a study abroad program, or he's doing something. That's not weird for Matt, especially growing up later. It was never weird for me to just go off the charts and just disappear. Um, but it's just there's a lot of darkness, I think, in this community that people aren't ready to talk about. And I think it's time, especially now, that education and learning and understanding is the biggest thing that's going to hold this community together at the end of the day.
How do we broach the darker topics?
I think we have to be open about them. I think we have to bring in some good understanding. I think we can't judge. And I think we also have to have a little bit of, I hate to say it, like, but some humor in it. I mean, some people think like, oh, what's so wrong about, you know, a bunch of gay guys in the woods hanging out together. Talk. It's a Brokeback Mountain scenario for any guy with a fetish, or like sometimes, I always laugh personally when you hear that there's like a gay guy going to prison. Well, God, what a horrible thing! A bunch of horned up straight men and a concrete building. Like that's what everyone looks for on Pornhub. Like just go at it. I think that there needs to just be like a level of humor to it
Okay.
because it is dark, but it's also it needs to be taken it needs to be taken at the value that it is by the person that's presenting it. And I think that there just needs to be this big understanding of the generational gaps that are there with people because, there are older people who went through maybe not the same experiences I did, but had just the same level of trauma or experience
Yeah.
or same steps that I went through. The only difference is I went through it at a camp but maybe I mean, some people went through it, you know, in the 50s and 60s,
Right.
and
Right.
they're out now and living their best life. So they had decades of it. I had 3 years of suppression, and there are kids who have
Uh,
suppression for 2 months, or, you know, like all through high school, and they come out. But, you know, I think it's bridging those gaps to understand that trauma is there for everyone, and everyone at any age, regardless of race, gender, religion. It's there, and it needs to be bridged together.
while you were talking, I was thinking about a friend of mine who he met his husband in the 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
and they both lost their jobs immediately.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, the stories that these men could tell, but also the bravery that they
Mm-hmm.
had to show to cope with all of that. And
Right.
I think Matt, that's the number one impression that I'm walking away from our conversation today with. It's just the strength, the courage that it would have taken to get through an experience like yours and to still be here in the world and feeling feeling like you can function in it. I think if I was wearing a hat, I would take it off to you, my friend.
Thank you.
Um, is there anything else that you want to tell the people listening that we haven't already covered?
I think it's just, you know, I one of the biggest things that I've taken away recently in the last, I mean, how long ago was the retreat? 2 months, a month, or whatever, is you got to dive into the community. And I think you got to dive into the community with areas that you resonate with. I'm a very spiritual person. I love energy. I love the fact that, like, you know, there's no one else but us in the world, and the world's probably the biggest, strongest force that we're ever going up against. And I've never felt more at home and more at peace and more secure than I was at that retreat. And for some of my other friends, it may be going to gay pride and dancing in a mosh pit with the drag queen performing. It's probably Celine Dion or Madonna for all I know. But, you know, that's where they feel safe and secure. And I think it's, you need to find your place of security to really start seeing who you are, and what you can contribute. And I think that just finding that community is the biggest thing that you can do.
I think that for people who come out of trauma, one of the most important things is to reestablish that sense of safety.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing you say is, hey, I found that through connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, like I told you at the camp, like on the last day there, I had a weird epiphany dream where, you know, those 7 guys who I spent 3 years with, uh, pretty much just told me, like, the group that was at that retreat, I can turn to at any time, anywhere, for anything. And that I always knew that I was, like, kind of missing their energy and their life and their spirit in me. And for me to have, like, that dream, or that, like, weird conversational dream that I think some people have, especially after trauma, where you just want to have that, okay, it's okay to be okay kind of conversation. I had that at the retreat, which meant that every single guy at that retreat was an energy that I needed in my life. And I don't know if I also told you, but just like sitting next to you, especially, was like the biggest heap of just like positive and like just like secured energy I've ever felt in
Wow.
my entire life.
Thank you.
And like, I was naturally an anxious person to go there anyway. But then, like, the minute I sat next to you and hearing you like chant, and just like hearing just like that like grounded silence you had, was like the most comforted thing in the entire world. And everyone else at that retreat was so comforting and grounding for me as well. But, you know, it was just safe. Like, I cried the first day there about my story, and I vowed to myself long ago that I was never going to cry about that experience ever again in my entire life. And, you know, Anthony was like, write about this, and I was like, oh crap, and just tears. And then sharing it, more tears. And then the second day, let's talk about overcoming it, tears. And just, but it was what I needed. And I knew that, like, at that time, in that group, with that community, my tears were not going to be caught on the ground. They were going to be caught by the support and energy that everyone had there. So it wasn't a wasted tear for me at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, what do you think the impact of telling your story has been and will continue to be for you?
For me, it's healing, but it's also scary because, you know, up until the retreat, I didn't talk about it for
Mm.
10 years to a lot of people. I have one really good friend who knows the whole story because he was the last person I texted, and I was like, I'm going away. I don't know for how long. I don't know where I'm going. Just know that I love you, dude. And he texted back. He was like, I'm here. Call me, text me, send a carrier pigeon. I will come find you and I will come get you.
Okay.
Um, and looking back at it now, I'm glad that I'm telling it because like you said, I can see the good and the bad from the experience. If you asked me that same question back before the retreat, I would have been like, it's horrible. Like,
Mm.
Reverend John is the first on my purge list if it ever happens. Like all these things, like, but now after the retreat and kind of seeing a new area of what I went through, you know, yes, the underlying experience was scary and bad, but now I can look back and say, but look where I am at 33 years old compared to where I was when I was 13, 14, 15, and 16.
What I think I hear you saying is there is a fear in opening up that door
Mm-hmm.
again and retelling that
Right.
story of reliving the darkness.
Yes.
And what I've heard in your answer just now is that's true to an extent,
Mm-hmm.
but it also led me to light.
Oh, for sure.
Okay. What a positive note to end on.
I know, right?
All right, my friend, my heart goes out to you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I feel privileged and honored to have borne witness to your story today, and I'm sure that you're talking about it will benefit many other people as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And with that, we'll end this episode. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and until next time.